So as I was prepping for this summit, I watched several videos of our two speakers. I called my college-age daughter and said, that's who I want to be when I grow up. And I plan on calling her again tonight and saying, no, I'm really serious. We've been hearing a lot about AI and what it means for national security, and we'll look forward to another deep dive on that later today. In the meantime, what other technology should we be concerned about? Of course, it's not just a matter of developing technologies. Another challenge is establishing the policy frameworks necessary for their implementation. Dr. Michael Sulmeyer will be leading this panel of specialists to discuss taking on tomorrow's threats. Dr. Sulmeyer is the Principal Cyber Advisor to the Secretary of the Army and Army Chief of Staff on all cyber matters, including issues of readiness, capabilities, and strategy. Among his many accomplishments, and prior to his appointment as Principal Cyber Advisor, Dr. Sulmeyer was the Director of the Rapid Vulnerability Review in the Office of the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sulmeyer and his panel.
Success did not trip walking onto the stage. Off to a great start. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a great show for you this morning. We have 55 minutes, 5 humans. We will be efficient. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Between Two Ferns. We're going to talk about a variety of emerging technologies today. But before we begin, thanks to Chancellor, to Brett, and also, especially everyone in the back actually running the show today, from video to check-in. Thanks for making this happen. And so here we go. So let's start first. I'll ask a question that is tailored to each of the panelists, and then I will ask a group question that I made up this morning and that no one has prepared for. Those are always the most fun, right? So we'll see how that goes. Well, first though, we'll start with Professor White, and I do want to actually start with the professor and the academic, not just because you're hosting, but also because, when you get a lot of talent from government that's up on the stage, you tend to talk a lot about government. So let's start at least with the conversation about the academy. With so much innovation and development that we've been hearing about over the last day and a half, starting and growing in the academy, tell us how you see this landscape, what's hype, what's not, and what's not getting enough focus from where you sit here at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so I think definitely large language models are definitely not hype, and they're definitely, I think, actually not getting enough attention, which it seems incredible because there's so much attention around them. But there's kind of 3 things around them that really concern me, and they're not the models themselves and the cybersecurity risks. All of those things are there. But the first thing is, what we've seen from research is that there's a dramatic difference in somebody who understands how to use these tools effectively and somebody who doesn't. So it's sort of deceiving because you go and you type in some text and you get an output. And so it looks like you can type in anything and it doesn't matter. But what we know is that what you type in, which is called a prompt, it dramatically affects the quality of the output. And so there's a whole discipline called prompt engineering, which is basically understanding the patterns that need to go into your language to get effective outputs out of it. So a simple example of this is if you go in and you ask it to produce an output and you have it explain its chain of thought or its reasoning before it produces the output, you'll get a better output. So, we need our workforce to understand these things because, if we're going to begin putting these tools out into the workforce, we have to understand how to use them effectively, how to make sure that they reason effectively, safely, securely, these types of things. And I think this part is being underplayed. There's sort of this assumption that, well, we just go use it and do whatever we want, but that's not sort of an effective approach to using them. So we've really got to close this gap in terms of the research around how do you use them effectively and securely and appropriately, and the education piece of getting it out into the workforce. And I'll give you an example of why it's such a big deal. Is like, as a software developer, I can go and write a piece of code once, and maybe I can iterate on it a little bit. But if I take one of these tools, I can have it go and generate 100 different solutions for me and automatically run every one of them and see how fast they are and test them for different security properties and then give me a selection to choose from. And that's a transformative capability. And then you start thinking about things like secure by design, where you could go and take legacy code now and have developers amplify their productivity and go and fix problems that we didn't have the time or budget to do before. So we've got to quickly get the research and education around this into the workforce so that we can be effective. I'm worried about the discussion in the news because I think it's very balanced all over the edges of it's either inaccurate or it's helping people cheat on exams or it's going to lead to the end of the world. And we're missing this sort of center part, this where we have this concrete discussion on it's going to go into the workforce. How do we prepare for that? What are the innovative use cases? Where is it safe to use it? Where is it not? And we got to fix that conversation. And I'm worried about that today because I think it also deters people from educating themselves. When they see it described as inaccurate, then they don't want to use it. When they see it as a risk to human life, they don't want to go and learn about it. And then the third thing that worries me is that we're behind on the research and education piece, and we're trying to just figure out the policy piece. And I think that's going to be really hard. How do we make intelligent decisions when we're still figuring out what it can do and how to best use it? And so, as an example, one of the things that worries me is this sort of default policy of deny and detect. So I'm of the mindset that we'll never be able to accurately detect in the long run. And what deny does is, like, if you're in an organization, if you say, let's deny usage of it, it tells all the people in the organization, you shouldn't go train on it, you shouldn't go learn about it, you shouldn't start thinking about it. It's kicking the can down the road in a way that's worrisome. Instead, I think you need to engage in the conversation of how do we appropriately use it in low-risk ways and prepare for what's coming down the pike and start skilling our workforce around this. And I'll give you an example in my class. So I teach a cybersecurity class. I can cut and paste my assignment into ChatGPT with the appropriate prompt engineering, and it can generate a solution that's as good or better than any of my students could generate as seniors. And my approach could be, deny and detect. You can't use this, and if you do, I'll detect you, and I'll send you off to the Honor Council. And realistically, that's a losing battle in the long run. But instead, what I said is, like, what innovative capabilities does this give me that I can use to further their education? And so I designed a prompt, which is, act as a Linux computer that has been the victim of a cyber attack. I'm going to type in Linux commands. You're going to output what that Linux command would produce on that computer. Tell me a story to get involved and bring me into it and give me clues about what I'm looking for. And then a student can go and begin interacting as if it's a real computer and discovering, evidence of a cyber attack when shit dreams up. And I fundamentally didn't have the capability to do something like that. There was no simulator, no paid, free other that I could do something like that before. And so we've got to figure out those types of things that give us those sort of transformative capabilities. And we need to do it by engaging the tool in an appropriate and safe way rather than default deny. I think we've got to, that policy I don't think works in the long run.
Got it. So the quick follow-up, you talk about the students. Would they and do they appreciate and understand the risk in the large language models and the work you're talking about? Or is the mentality, as Jen Easterly was telling us, fail fast, go, 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 how do I get to a startup, create, and darn the risk?
Well, they definitely understand the risk, but the first risk they think of is different. They think, I'm graduating in computer science. Should I have gone into another field? So, like, no joke, that's the first thing. I mean, that's the first thing I thought as a software engineer is, wow, it's doing something that looks like what software engineers do. That's worrying. But I think they absolutely do understand a lot of the risks. But at the same time, I think this is why education is so important, because we need to explain to them, like, there's a difference in the output, right? If you just ask it for a solution, it's not necessarily going to give you one that's secure. But if you change the prompt, if you change the wording around it, you're more likely to get something that's secure. And people need to understand those things, in their use of these tools. Well said. All right, Michelle Rousseau, you're up. Here we go. We're going to pause on the AI. I know, and it's so hot right now. We're going to talk biotechnology for a minute here. So, Michelle, you've spent time in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Research and Engineering, coming off an incredibly impactful time at the White House. You are responsible for so much of the thought leadership on biotechnology right now. And yet, when we were talking earlier, you were saying, it's not so emerging.
we've had biotechnology around for decades. Yep. So why is biotechnology on a panel about taking on tomorrow's threats today on emerging technology?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. So just as a scene setter, biotechnology, what is it, right? It's technology at its simplest sense based on biology. And so the ability to engineer living organisms, to create products, capabilities, technologies. And as Michael mentioned, we've been doing this for a long time. Projections are that 5% of US GDP is dependent on biotechnology today. Throwing a couple more numbers out for you, this is 40% of the drugs that are sold already in America are biologics based on biotechnology. It's 60% of crops grown in the United States. And so think of like cotton and soybean and corn. And maybe most surprisingly, it's 20% of our industrial market. So chemicals produced by fermentation, biomanufacturing, as opposed to chemical synthesis. So it's already a massive part of our economy, but you can think of this as based on the first generation of these technologies. And as folks in my field affectionately say, we are on the cusp of a biorevolution. This is owing to three main areas of technology advancement. The first is our ability to edit DNA and genetic code and do that more efficiently and effectively. You may have heard about CRISPR. This is just one example of a type of tool that can be used now more efficiently and effectively and quickly to edit DNA. That coupled with AI, we've been talking about this a lot today, our ability to understand big data sets around biology, and then automation to do this at scale is increasingly changing what we can do with biotechnology and biology. It's hard to quantify just how much economic potential this could be, but recent consultants estimated this could be $4 trillion of economic activity annually in the next 10 to 20 years. And this could radically change almost everything that we do in our world and how we impact, how we interact with the natural environment. Think about health. Estimates are that advances could take away 50% of the disease burden in the world. So you may already be seeing this in your interactions with the healthcare system today. What used to be a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to medicine is now increasingly more personalized and precision, and based on your own genetic information, we can tailor therapeutics and treatments. Moving forward, we think about the ability to completely cure a disease based on a mutation in one gene, so things like sickle cell anemia, hereditary blindness, types of cancer. So really the opportunities are abound. Opportunities for climate change and novel food production, for supply chain security, and the ability to produce even more aspects of our supply chain with biological means and biomanufacturing, as opposed to other kind of traditional means of production. So from just an economic security standpoint, we want to capture this value. From a national security standpoint, Michael mentioned I came from the Department of Defense. We were interested in leveraging biotechnology for military capabilities. This could be things like, I mentioned, better means of production. The DoD relies on foreign sources or sole sources for critical chemicals, elements in the supply chain. Biotech and biomanufacturing can provide novel ways of producing these critical inputs into our DoD supply chain, our national security supply chain, and do it in a way that can bring back these supply chains to the United States. In addition, there's the potential for leap-ahead capabilities, right? So biology can do way more than just give us, the same means that we're working with today, but do so in a way that gives us advantages. So there's DARPA programs, for example, around growable runways and the ability to build and repair buildings far afield. We think about logistics on demand, far forward healthcare and delivery, and warfighter performance. So, and biodefense, of course, and the ability to protect against threats. So really the opportunities, from a national security perspective are also critical. But I would be remiss in saying all of these opportunities without mentioning the risks here, right? And so, of course, all of these advances that I mentioned in editing and AI and automation are making it easier, of course, to misuse the technology. And we must be mindful of the risks there. We hear about the potential to weaponize biology, and it's so critical, therefore, that the United States and our partners and allies are writing the rules of the road for this technology, are making sure that it's developed, designed, deployed, and used in a way that security, safety, and ethics are in mind. And so with all of that as background was the impetus for the release of the executive order that the president signed out in September of last year. This launched a national biotech and biomanufacturing initiative, along with $2 billion in initial funding to do a number of things. First, design the strategy for how the government was going to look at this critical technology to make sure that we can continue to capture the innovation. By all accounts, we are leading, but our strategic competitors are investing large sums of money and are increasingly prioritizing biotech and biomanufacturing. And we heard from companies that they are leaving the United States to do their manufacturing elsewhere for a number of reasons. And so we don't want to replicate what we saw with chips in the semiconductor industry. So the initiative also includes support for building biomanufacturing capacity in the United States. So what we invent here, we can make here. And critically important for this audience, it also builds in security by design across each step of the way so that the technology development is done in step with the security development, that those are done in tandem, and that is supported through novel types of R&D, again, so that we can make sure that the technology is continued to be used for good in all of those potential advances I mentioned earlier, and we can prevent, again, its misuse.
Outstanding, if also worrisome. If I might ask a quick follow-up, I've never been a journalist before, but this is great to actually do like these follow-ups, that journalists do. Hi, Martin. So let me just ask, so you've left government now and are with In-Q-Tel, but you're still going to be involved in this with a commission. And Michelle's so humble. I mean, she was the engine behind the executive order that was signed not too long ago on biotech. Tell us how the commission, how you're going to keep involved with it.
Sure. So Michael kindly mentioned the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech. This is modeled after the National Security Mission on Artificial Intelligence and the Cyber Solarium, which you may be familiar with. So the commission was created out of the 22 NDAA, and our charge is to examine advances in biotechnology and make recommendations for how the United States can continue to develop its capabilities, make sure we can leverage the technology for our national and economic security and prevent, again, its misuse. So exactly, ties in nicely with the impetus behind the executive order. Maybe a shameless plug for those in the audience is that we are in the cusp of staffing up. We're looking for motivated people to work on this important topic. And so if anyone is interested, please talk to me. We're looking for people across all disciplines and expertise. And really, I think this is what's critical about our work is leveraging the expertise and the exemplars of the technologies that have come before, what's worked, what hasn't, and be able to apply that to biotechnology and how we think about making recommendations for the legislator, for the executive branch, in order to continue to advance the field.
Perfect. Okay, I feel better. You're staying on the case. Kiersten Todt, here we go. Moving on now, let's talk about the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Share with us, if you would, your reflections on that. And we had talked a little bit about specifically the secure by design principles and where that's hopefully taking us into a more secure future.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thanks for the energy, the game show energy that you're bringing at early in the morning. We all appreciate it. So the National Cybersecurity Strategy, is really looking at making two fundamental shifts. And I think before we talk about those specifics, it's appreciating that this is an interagency document. I think one of the greatest achievements is that you see the agency, the federal government coming together, unified around the need for a national cybersecurity strategy as one of the gravest national security threats confronting the nation. Some will say Secretary Mayorkas recently talked about fentanyl. So we're looking at certainly one of the gravest security threats that we have. But the two fundamental shifts that it's asking for is realigning the incentives to be able to look long term. So ensuring that we are actually investing in the long term and we're not looking for the short-term solution. You heard Director Easterly talk earlier just about this whole, first to market trumping secure to market, being able to get something out there before we're actually making sure it's the right product. The second piece is ensuring that we're rebalancing the responsibility. we've developed a structure and an infrastructure where we are asking end users, the last person, the last entity in the supply chain, to hold all the responsibility of the risk. And we've got to flip that. And so the strategy does this by really focusing on 5, what it calls pillars. It looks at defending critical infrastructure, dismantling and disrupting threat actors. And I'll take a moment just to talk about the key piece here, which is really operational collaboration, which is something at CISA we've been focused on since the launch of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. It's about industry and government coming together in real time. And we learned a lot of important lessons from Ukraine. We heard a little bit about this morning, just in how industry was working with government, and importantly, what industry was doing. And we have to continue that and grow that, because that is how we're going to disrupt and dismantle threat actors. The third piece is shaping market forces. And we really, I'll talk a little bit about the secure by design piece, but how we're creating incentives for security, that we see security as a differentiator, security as something that we opt for, not that we're trying to avoid. And secure innovation should not be an oxymoron. It actually should be an end state, something that we're working toward. The fourth is talking about investment in a resilient future, which again goes to what is it that we're building today, because the infrastructure that we build today creates the foundation for what's tomorrow, which means both the assets, the positives and the negatives. And the fifth is really looking at forging international relationships. You know, we talk a lot about how cybersecurity doesn't respect geographical boundaries, yet our policies and our approaches are very nation-state, nation-focused. And so we have to be doing a better job, particularly when we're talking about artificial intelligence, because we can make a choice about how we're going to handle it, but if we're not making that choice in partnership and collaboration with our like-minded economic partners, with our allies, with those other countries that are also investing in it, then we are going to be abandoned, isolated, and looking at different pieces. So if we look at all of this, one of the things that we'll talk about is secure by design, secure by default. What this means is we've got to be able to prioritize security in such a way that tech manufacturers are not asking you to opt in for security, to opt in for safety. We no longer pay for a seatbelt. We don't pay for an airbag. We shouldn't have to pay for the basic security features that make us safe. And the evolution of language from security to safety is really important, because when technology is grounded in our infrastructure, it is about safety. It's about what protects us. And so we've got to be able to focus on that. CISA recently launched these core principles for tech manufacturers that start with this idea that tech manufacturers have to be responsible for the security outcomes of their products. We've got to stop ensuring that or having it be the third party that is enduring that, because typically that's an individual, but even more importantly for supply chains, that's a small business that often doesn't have the resources to be able to manage and to mitigate those threats. The second piece of this is radical transparency, that what we call at CISA is really being able to see what goes into software development. In 2016, I ran President Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity, and we had this whole discussion around nutrition labels. And I think what's so important, it's not a perfect analogy, but when we talk about radical transparency, it's understanding what goes into software development, because this is also about experiential learning. We're not all closet nutritionists, but we know what saturated fat is. And we wouldn't have known that before we started paying attention to nutrition labels. So experiential learning is saying what goes into software development, what are you going to pay attention to, what's your risk tolerance and your risk appetite to be able to manage that. And then again, it's building the safety and the software products that you can stand by because you know how resilient they are. So that's the tech piece of this. The other piece that we're focused on at CISA is something this year, a priority from Director Easterly, has been corporate cyber responsibility. The roles of senior executives to take responsibility for the cybersecurity, for the resilience of their company, regardless of the mission of the company. Everything that we do now has a cyber underpinning. So cyber literacy has become as important as financial literacy. The digitization of corporate assets means that there's a digitization of corporate risk. So we have to ensure that senior executives are taking that responsibility. Yesterday was the sentencing of Joe Sullivan, the former CISO of Uber. And interestingly, when the judge was sentencing him, he said, this is a serious offense. Joe was convicted of hiding a felony and obstruction of justice. And he said, this is a serious offense, and I'm wondering why the CEO isn't being charged as well. And I think if this is a mindset shift that we're going to start to see, it's not about an individual being responsible, but it's about the corporate culture and senior executives. So as we're creating this culture of responsibility, how do we prioritize cybersecurity? So if we are to look 5 years down the road at what we would see in the national cyber strategy, I don't know what the next 5 years are going to be with AI, but certainly we're going to see this evolution. The key then is the partnership between technology and innovation and human engagement. We want to make sure that we're harnessing technological innovation, but ensuring that we are valuing the critical assets known as cognitive thinking, as human judgment, because the future of our tech innovation is going to need to go hand in hand with our ability to perform as human beings and to perform alongside this innovation to ensure that we have a secure, a resilient, an innovative digital economy, and importantly, a global society.
Amazing. Okay. Let me try to channel our friends from the history department real quick here at Vanderbilt and ask, rather than looking for the future, go back to 2016 when you're in the Obama administration, when you were building that cyber strategy, looking ahead to today. Did you think then that this would be the future, what the future would look like in 2023? Briefly, is this on a trajectory that you had anticipated?
I feel like I should be saying I'll take 500. I'll take AI for 500, Michael. But I think that what we talked about in 2016 was interesting because I talk about secure to market, first to market. We were talking about IoT. That was we were given 8 topics by the president. One of them was securing the Internet of Things. Not even a term that we're using that much. But I think what's fascinating, and Michelle talked about this as well, it's that we are developing technology. These technologies have unintended consequences. Social media, as Director Easterly talked about earlier, was tended to bring the world together. It has serious secondary impacts that we are continuing to experience. So I think what we saw in 2016 was just this idea that technological innovation, we have to get in front of it. We have to see it as a priority. And looking at we use the term regulation and everyone, freaks out. It's not about regulation. It's about scaling management. The op-ed that was in the New York Times from Dr. Hinton, the godfather of AI, he talked about the fact that we have to work together as scientists, as nations, to figure out how to scale AI. And Jules and I were talking about, it's not necessarily about the solution, but we've got to make sure we're asking the right questions. So no, we weren't anticipating necessarily this issue today, but we certainly were anticipating this reckless innovation problem that when we don't get ahead of it, we're always playing catch up.
Got it. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. On to Kelly Fletcher, the State Department's CIO, now in the job for
6 months.
6 months. Help the audience here understand how being the CIO for our nation's diplomats, what does that look like in practice? And also help us just get a view of what is the State Department? How big is the State Department? People, budget, just the core foundations. And what are the technological opportunities that you're most intrigued by that can make a difference for America's diplomats?
Yeah, thanks. This is a great question. So I do just want to start by saying, as I've been listening, I've been like, what am I doing here? And then it became clear to me what I am doing here, right? Which is, these are global issues, right? So there's a lot of work to do here in America, but the way that we engage internationally, the way that we engage with other countries on these hard issues is through our diplomats. And they are located, so now to get to sort of the core of your question, we've got 275 locations in over 190 countries. So just to give some idea to this, we are in Beijing, we are in Moscow, we are in Dili, which is in East Timor. We are in Sudan. We just recently left Sudan, but we were there until moments ago. We are all over the world. So if you think about sort of all of the capitals of the nations on the earth, we are in almost all of them. And that is where sort of our diplomats are engaging on these issues. So talking about sort of how do we enable them to do that, I think it's my job to be supporting of these folks who are engaging on these issues. We operate a global network, and we enable them to communicate the way that they need to engage with their peers where they're at. So in some of these places, right, we have really robust communication means. We've been there for a long time. We've been engaging for a long time. We're communicating, via email. We're communicating in a classified way. We're communicating all over the place. In other places, we are in locations where our diesel fuel is being siphoned, right? So just wildly different kinds of environments. And in those places, maybe we're communicating with, WhatsApp or with other kind of applications like that. In those places, we're not communicating with email. We are meeting folks where they are at. So the exciting thing about being the CIO of the State Department is that I have just a huge, wide variety of things that I need to support. So in some places, they're talking to me about how do we use generative AI to look at all of our cables, and how do we use, machine learning to make predictions about voting, like really complex, challenging, and interesting problems. In other places, they're like, hey, we're drinking the internet through a straw. It costs a lot of money. Even just staying up, even just getting to the cloud is really a challenge in places like Tonga, for example. And then I do just want to take a brief moment. I know we're talking about sort of tomorrow's threats, but I want to talk just a teeny bit about a threat that we faced in the past several weeks. So war broke out in Sudan, and we had to evacuate the embassy. And for me, this was a big wake-up call about we do all this work so that diplomats overseas can engage with their peers, and we have all this information at the embassy, and then we're going to leave. And we're going to lock the door, but it's a war zone, So I was so proud to be part of the State Department team at this time, because not only did we keep our communications going using radios, using everything ranging from incredibly exquisite and advanced technology to, frankly, radios. But we stayed up right up until we left, and then we didn't leave important information or technology there. And so this is a real balancing act, you can imagine. So this is something that honestly, until I worked for the State Department, it didn't occur to me that this is happening globally. This is happening, all over the world, and it's happening pretty regularly. So not only do we have to worry about these really exquisite and cool technology threats, but we have to worry about threats that we've had, frankly, for decades.
Got it. So when I was thinking about your job and what you do, I was definitely thinking about enabling diplomacy, but it's a good corrective to add also enabling their safety and security as well around the world. So for those taking notes out there, hang a star by safety and security as well as diplomacy. Let me ask as a quick follow-up. I mean, the State Department is doing such an amazing job right now in terms of recruiting and building talent with not just yourself, Nate Fick, and a new emerging technology directorate. How is the civil service and the foreign service there as a whole? Are they embracing the emerging technology issues, biotechnology, cybersecurity, the AI? Tell us a little bit about that.
I love the softball. I needed the softball. I'm going to shameless plug. So, we have a new Ambassador Fick has stood up a really exciting opportunity, which is for foreign service folks to become experts on, technology. So a lot of what our diplomats are engaging in is about technology, and historically, they haven't been technologists. So I actually got to speak to the new set of ambassadors, and I told them not only like, hey, when you get to the embassy, make sure you ask to have the Wi-Fi working, that kind of thing, the sort of basic CIO stuff. But I also said, if you need help understanding what spectrum is, because your foreign counterparts want to talk about it, go talk to your IT pro. So there's a ton of opportunity at State, both in a policy domain and then also in the actual hands-on. And one thing I will say is, if I had known about the job to be an IT pro for the State Department as a foreign service officer, I would not be here today. I would be in Nepal being an IT pro. It is the coolest job I have ever heard about. So I would say for all of you who know young people who have a little bit of savvy with technology, we don't need people who necessarily are, the best coder in the world. That's great. But we need people who are not afraid of technology, who have a spirit of adventure, and then they can join the Foreign Service and be an IT pro, live all over the world, and it is the coolest job, careers.state.gov. But I would say you get to go abroad, run a team, keep the network up and running, anywhere from West Africa to Costa Rica, you name it, we are there. It's a really cool job.
Terrific. If you didn't provide the State Department website, I was going to help because
The coolest job.
going to army.mil for recruiting is terrific. But oh no, that would be for me. Sorry. So now we're on to our dear colleague and friend Rob Baer to my immediate left. Works at a company, he left the Navy and is now with a company called Team Cymru, which also is known by Team Cymru, though incorrectly pronounced. So before we get to the question, what is a Cymru? What is a Cymru? And tell us just quickly, what is that about?
It's really creative.
Okay.
It means Wales in Welsh.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
That's the name.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's where he works. Not in Wales, but still in the National Capital Region. So, let me ask a little bit about how you've seen through your career in the Navy, several years working at the White House across multiple administrations. Take the operational angle for a lot of this conversation as well, and to take it back where we were with Professor White about some of the public-private relationships as well, since you are living that right now as a human being.
Yeah, Kelly, I'm really asking myself what I'm doing here right now. But if I say anything too controversial, I know I have a job in Nepal as an IT pro, so.
I mean, careers.state.gov.
Yes.
We would take you.
So, I mean, throughout my career, we've had a track record of working closely with industry, and I think General Nakasone and Director Easterly and my former colleagues in the White House, we did a really great job generating visibility and insights from industry, incorporating industry insights into Presidential Policy Directive 41, utilizing that visibility and telemetry to respond to incidents. And it's been like a really great partnership. And to Kiersten's comments, we need to continue to build on that relationship. But from an operational perspective, what I look at today and the things that I experienced in the Navy in the past, there are several things that I think, one, concern me, and two, think that we can continue to grow upon. The first thing is the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure that underpins all critical infrastructure, and that's the telecommunications infrastructure backbone in the United States. And that story really begins right here in Nashville. Christmas Day 2020, an RV detonated on 2nd Street, took out AT&T telecommunications network. 911 services were down for a large part of the Southeast for several days. And emergency services providers had to move to alternative means of communication. And then more recently, in the Matsu Islands, we saw 2 Chinese fishing vessels sever cables that totally took down communications to the Matsu Islands in what I would consider probably an attempt at some sort of gray zone warfare. And so when you're in the Matsu Islands and it takes you 10 minutes to send a text message, right, what is a potential near-peer adversary looking at that would enable them to do something in the event of a large-scale conflict? So after the event here in Nashville, I got on the phone with Dr. Goldstein, actually, and we talked about, how do we identify critical vulnerabilities in the telecommunications sector and where are codependencies, and really understanding how everything that flows through the RF spectrum and flows over an IP circuit passes through our backbone telco. And how do we trace that within the United States and identify really core areas where is the next Nashville, and how do we build resiliency and redundancy to combat that, to ensure that we have continuity of government, continuity of operations, and continuity of economy. The second thing that, from an operational perspective, that I'm concerned about, I think, is surge capacity. In the event of a large-scale conflict, and I think people take the liberty to guess what will happen in the future if we go to war, and usually get it wrong, so I'll take my opportunity to get it wrong. I don't think that we're going to see a nationwide blackout, in the event of a large-scale conflict. I think we will see intermittent disruptions in disparate geographic sectors, in disparate industries. And having worked with a lot of really competent cyber operators in the past, there is no one person that knows how to respond to an incident against SWIFT or ICS SCADA or HMIs or telecom. So how do you build this capacity when you have Director Easterly's forces responding somewhere in the Northeast, General Nakasone defending defense critical infrastructure, and then potentially under defense support to civil authority. How do you prioritize? And is an outage of electricity in the Northeast during the middle of the winter more important, or is restoring water to the naval base in Norfolk more important? So you now have this capacity issue, and I think this is where really industry can come into play here. How do you deputize industry, and how do you provide liability protections to industry to ensure that you can meet the surge capacity? And I really think that there's something that's probably even more complicated than figuring out the policy. It's how do you do an accounting of where our experts are, who should be responding to what, and how they should respond. So that's the second thing. And you know, on that topic, I think CISA has published a really great paper on how the Chinese actually do what they call cyber ranges, and they bring together academia, industry, and government to drill how they will respond in different provinces. So 19 provinces have the program up and running right now. By no means am I saying that we should emulate anything that the Chinese do with the internet, but I think we could potentially take a little lesson from their playbook and say, you know, how do we bring everyone together, learn how to defend, and then take those defensive capabilities and potentially learn how to shape them in the event that we would need them. And then the final thing that concerns me is, you know, again, not to emulate China, but we don't have the Great Firewall in the United States, right? And there are many good reasons why we don't do that and why we shouldn't do that. And in 2019, right at the height of the trade tensions, China Telecom actually stopped dropping packets that were destined inbound and out of China that had a great deal of effect on Western businesses and U.S. businesses. And so, you know, one of the things I think about in the future is, you know, what is industry willing to do, and what can we ask industry to do something similar in the event of an existential conflict, and how do we create a great firewall without creating one to protect our critical infrastructure at the time that we need it? Can we ask, you know, large telecommunications providers to drop packets destined from China for the United States? Is that a possibility? How do you do it? How do you prevent them from getting to U.S. infrastructure that's used as a service, as a hot point to get into critical infrastructure? So yeah, those are the few things that I think that, you know, where industry could come into play and what keep me awake from an operational perspective.
Gotcha. Okay, so the quick follow-up there then is, you know, so Rob leaves the Navy after a career of distinguished service, now in the private sector. The question is, do you miss the mission, or really, do you miss us? You know, and since the answer is yes, do you see, you know, a range of opportunities to still contribute to a national cause, to still be involved across any of these areas, cybersecurity, you name it, whether it's at CISA or with the Navy or with the department?
Yeah, I miss it greatly. I've worked for some incredible mentors in this room, on this stage. I miss it every day, but you know, I wanted to kind of stay in the fight, and being at a cyber threat intelligence firm, it is all about collaboration and sharing data across government and industry. So, you know, I needed to stay somewhere where I could give back, and maybe one day I'll be back.
Sounds good. Thanks for doing what you're doing, Rob Baer. Okay, so now Brett Goldstein, he has been DDoSing my phone with questions from the audience. So here's what we'll do. We'll do a couple of these. The first question, anonymous, says, I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller, and not sure what that person is referring to, but saying, you know, are we at a Wile E. Coyote moment on artificial intelligence? That is, have we gone off the cliff on how large language models and the developments are occurring? And are we at that point in the cartoon where we are looking around, but we haven't yet done the drop? And so I would, we'll just put this to everybody. We'll just walk down the line in the order that we did. Are we kind of at that moment? Is that an apt metaphor? If not, what would be a better way to kind of look at where we are and how do we try for a soft landing? Professor White.
So I definitely don't think we're about to fall off the cliff. So I hope what we're doing is taking off and doing a bunch of interesting things. I mean, I think the key is that we use it responsibly in thinking through our application. So like if I go to the medical center, I don't want AI diagnosing me right now. But on the other hand, I've heard examples of, using it, for example, to train medical students on how to do telehealth. And so you tell the model, pretend to be, a patient of this age with this educational background and interact and be able to do training instead of having to go hire actors. Or, search through all the documentation in the medical center around processes and find conflicts or inconsistencies that could have an impact on patient health. And, that's something we couldn't do today, if we didn't have these models. So I think there's lots of use cases like that where if we're smart about how we do it and we think about, teaching people appropriate use, teaching secure use, teaching how to be effective with it, I think we're going to be taking off. I do think that I am more on the side of the risk of if we don't educate people appropriately, that we will lose this opportunity to innovate. And I'm more worried about, 10 years from now that we lost this opportunity and somebody else took advantage of it. And from a national competitiveness perspective, we've really shot ourselves in the foot. And I think from a security perspective, I think that that's more of a risk from my perspective than, AI taking over the world, us falling off the cliff or creating the cybersecurity issues. I'm sure there will be cybersecurity issues, but I think it has, a balancing ability to go and counteract some of those through fixing old code and doing things like that.
Okay, that works for me. Kiersten, what do you think? Wile E. Coyote, pro or con?
I don't think we're falling off the cliff, and I wish I could resurrect a good Looney Tunes analogy for where we are, but it's not coming. I should ask Director Easterly for her pop culture references. You've got 13 minutes and 7 seconds. It's sort of like your Rubik's Cube. I think, we're not there. I agree with the taking off. I agree that we are at a point for deliberate, responsible growth where we're working together. It's not just by nation, it's together. Again, this is a global opportunity. Mm-hmm. But I'll take a little bit of a different tact about where I think there's an opportunity, because we talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we talk about building an inclusive workforce. Vanderbilt launched this Frist Center for Autism and Innovation, which has a degree program that's called NICE. It's the Neurodiversity-Inspired Science and Engineering Graduate Trainee Program, which trains graduate students in creating technologies not only that can be used by neurodiverse individuals, but that truly access and leverage the talents of neurodiverse individuals. When we think about artificial intelligence, we're thinking about the symptoms, but one of the key elements to AI is data origin. Where is the data coming from? Is the data unbiased? Machine learning and artificial intelligence is only as good as the data that goes into it. So we have an opportunity right now to really pull on diversity of thinking. And as Professor Tucker said in the outset, looking at humanities, all of these other elements to create diversity of thinking. Diversity of thinking leads to less biased data. Mm-hmm. So as we're looking at where we are in this takeoff in AI, I think there's a huge opportunity to capitalize on a broad workforce that we're not accessing, but that we have the ability to truly access because we need it. If we're thinking about where we want to be in 10 years, the only way we're going to do that is by truly accessing the talents, the capabilities, the unique talents and capabilities of everybody, where we're really representing, our workforce represents the entire globe. And so I see one part of this as an opportunity to kind of put fast forward on the efforts that we have for creating a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible workforce.
Okay, I like it. I'm 0 for 2 on Wile E. Coyote. Michelle, what do you think?
No, I mean, these are amazing points. And I really just want to footstop what both Jules and Kiersten said, because Jules gave great examples of the applications to biotech, right? And how we could use artificial intelligence as a way to help train medical students. There's plenty of examples that I mentioned earlier of why the convergence of artificial intelligence and biotech is really going to be this leap ahead advance for the field. And we need folks that are cross-trained, as Kiersten mentioned. Like, we need to develop that talent that has the ability to understand not only biology, but also the computer science aspect of that. So I think of it as a real opportunity. We need to develop this workforce, and again, foot-stopping what Kiersten said, we need to make sure that we're spearheading the ability to create professionals that can think about all of these multifaceted aspects of the world that we live in today and tomorrow. And that comes back to, we know where to start with education and with training, and multiple opportunities to do so at high school level, at college level, to create this future workforce. So I see it as an opportunity not just for some of the examples that were given already, but also for all of the opportunities in biotech that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be predicated upon leveraging artificial intelligence to make sense of biology in order to deliver the advances, for health, for climate, for food security, for supply chain security. We're going to have to integrate those things together. We're going to have to do it responsibly. We're going to have to do it in a way that we can make sense of the data and know what is real and what is not. And we need to understand where we are in that progression to be able to know when we can read the images via AI, right? We're not there yet. And so that's going to take a lot of consideration, potential regulation, really examining every facet of this problem to be able to map that trajectory and understand how we can best apply the technologies to the challenges we face today and tomorrow.
Got it. Well, these are great odds for Wile E. Coyote. This is quite optimistic, actually, in terms of how things are going. Kelly, your thoughts?
I'm going to say yes. We're at the over the cliff part, mostly just to spice it up a little bit. Yeah. So the reason I think we're over the cliff, I feel like where we are with AI. So first, I want to say it's very exciting. We're totally in. I'm excited about new technology, but it reminds me a little bit of where we were with the cloud 10 years ago, where there was this idea that there was a thing called the cloud, and we didn't totally understand what it was, but we knew it was going to save us a lot of money and make us a lot more secure and make everything in our job a ton easier. And that was not totally correct. You know what I mean? It costs money, and we have to do work to get in there, and not everything is in there, and it's been 10 years. And there are pros and cons, and yes, we're using the cloud, and I love the cloud, but it's a little bit more complex. And it didn't solve all my problems. So I think with AI right now at the State Department, we feel strongly like we're at an inflection point. We're going to be able to use this to solve all these problems. And I think that's true. I think we're already solving problems with advanced technology. But I think as these technologies just become part of my broader platforms, right? As I consume them in other capabilities and suites of services that I'm buying, they're going to be like everything else. Am I going to use them? Yes. Will they make some things easier? Absolutely. But they're going to cost money. They're not going to solve all my problems. And then there's going to be new challenges that they introduce as well. And I also think in the federal government, I live in a legacy environment. So I have, stuff from 1985 in basements. And then I also have this really cool promise of advanced technology to solve a lot of problems. I need to get from here to there. And so part of that is just going to be sort of hard, grinding work. Hopefully these new technologies can help me do that, but I guess I would just say a note of caution on how quickly am I going to magically transform to no longer do work that isn't, value added. And then the one last thing I will say is from the State Department perspective, it is really important to us that humans do human work. So we make decisions every day on, adjudicating visa requests, that kind of thing. This is human work. Our work is very relational, so we need humans to have relationships with other humans.
Got it. Okay, Professor Baer.
Well, I haven't made up my mind yet, but one of the things I do think about is hallucinations, not only my own, but those of AI, and really kind of second and third order effects of implementing AI. And I think, for example, if a banking firm figures out how to capitalize on AI to make billions of dollars faster than anyone else in the industry, what are the effects on the macro economy? And I think that's a long way of saying it's all about responsible use. And so how does the private sector and industry develop policies that fit their own business models while respecting global norms and freedoms and to support national security? Okay, that works for me. Thanks for the longtime listener, first-time caller for that great question to kick us off. We're down to 5 minutes here for the panel, so we're going to do a speed round of questions and answers. Thanks for sending in the questions here. First one for Kiersten, although if folks want to weigh in. Here we go. You mentioned the importance of cyber literacy for executives as being as important as financial literacy.
How can we improve societal cyber literacy when we struggle to teach high school students how to balance a checkbook? Zing.
It's a great question, and it's something that CISA has been very focused on, which is essentially how do we make cybersecurity accessible? And so we've got training programs, but this is very much about how do we start, and I talk about the culture of cybersecurity. CISA's prioritized cultures of cybersecurity, but it starts at elementary school level. So we've got to actually start the education at our elementary schools. When we are giving a child an iPad to start to learn how to read or to do math, we need to be teaching them cybersecurity. If you ask a first grader what they want to be, they'll say construction worker, teacher, or doctor, because those are the people in their environment. So we've got to be bringing cybersecurity into the environment at a very young age. And so working with our K through 12 partners, it's another priority of CISA, of Director Easterly's this year, is not just securing K through 12, but how do we work with these partners to ensure that we are bringing this education into this level? And I think then we create this culture over time, and we're creating a long-term investment in education that will have far-reaching benefits to our workforce, but more importantly to society.
Got it. Okay. Any other quick reactions to that? We're in favor of balancing checkbooks. Consensus nods. Okay. Question for Michelle here. Quote, have there been any new checks and balances put in place in the biotechnology field in recent years to safeguard against the innovation adversaries versus truly unique breakthroughs and capability gaps? So checks and balances put in place in biotech. Michelle Rowe.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I mentioned, we're really on this cusp of these leap ahead advances. Right now, and a lot of this community has been doing this in norms and principles, right? And so there's been a history of the biotech community pausing and taking time and taking stock of advances in genetic engineering, for example, to see what sort of boundaries should be around the technology. But by and large, this has been community-driven. And so these conversations need to happen now across governments, across international partners. Biology is unique in that it doesn't respect borders, and it's also self-sustaining, right? And so we could make a decision here in the United States of how we want to use a technology, but if it's different from another country, that will only protect us as so much as it takes for someone else to develop something that then can be transmitted or moved to the United States. And so the type of conversations that need to be had is really looking into the future. A lot of what we have today are based on those first generation technologies and don't take into account where the technology is moving. So this is an area where we need to balance the ability to get products to market in ways that create the ecosystem and the potential capabilities that are potentially possible with some of the security and safety. And so an example of something that we were looking at in terms of the checks and balances is really moving forward the technology of security by design along with the R&D of biotech. And so an example here is I have 2 minutes, so I want to make sure other people can speak here, but the potential to have an organism that can remediate the environment, so remove PFAS, PFOA from the environment by being able to capture it and take it away. Really cool potential advance. But if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that the organism, does not do things we don't want it to do. So potential for kill switches or barcodes or things like that are all elements of research that need to be moving forward and things that we were talking about alongside launching the National Biotech and Biomanufacturing Initiative.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. We are down to the wire here. So my first lesson I learned in academia was end class a little early. That's how you get good teacher evaluations. So, well, that's all I need, exactly. So I think we'll call it there. But, first, I just want to thank everybody on the panel. If I could join me in thanking everybody for coming down. Thank you. And thanks so much to Vanderbilt and Brett and the organizers for pulling together not just such a great panel, but such a great audience as well, getting to meet everybody over cocktail hour from terrific different backgrounds. It's been a lot of fun. And, to join any of us in public service for government, and please look up the websites. Go to goarmy.com. Go to state.gov and a variety of other
careers.state.gov.
CISA.gov, of course.
Yeah.
USA.gov. We'd love to work with you. So thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.